and Mr. Epstein was there, and Miss Maxwell, but
Were there other people in that pool or hot tub with you as well?
I don't know who that is.
But he's also asking in the pool area whether other
Yes,
individuals.
I don't know who that is.
Today, we're taking a closer look at a key moment in Bill Clinton's testimony in the Epstein investigation, and not just what he says, but what his language reveals. From photos in a hotel pool to questions about who was there, we'll uncover the hedges, the pauses, and the narrative tactics Clinton uses to shape perception, and why the reliability of his testimony may be open to question. Some of his answers may seem simple at first, but the language tells a different story. Stick around, because the deeper the questioning goes, the stranger the answers become. Welcome to the channel. Let's dive in.
And what we're trying to get at is some context for the public on whether you remember this photo and any details you may be able to provide us about it. So do you recall the details of this photo, or recall the photo being taken?
No, I don't think I ever knew the photo was taken.
Notice how the questioner frames the question in two parts, probing both memory of the event and memory of the photo itself, which increases pressure on Clinton to be precise. Clinton's response is short, but linguistically it does several strategic things at once. First, he begins with a clear no, which satisfies the basic expectation of a yes or no answer, but he immediately softens it with a hedge.
I don't think.
This reduces certainty and signals caution. In testimony, this kind of phrasing protects the speaker if contradictory information later appears. There's also a subtle shift in the wording. Clinton's asked whether he recalls the photo being taken, and he answers that he never knew it was taken. This moves the focus from memory to awareness, creating a buffer that allows for plausible deniability. Notice too that he says he doesn't think he ever knew the photo was taken, which expands the claim across his entire memory. So even if the photo exists, he can maintain he was never aware of it. Finally, notice the passive construction.
The photo was taken.
This removes the person who actually took the picture, a common testimony technique used to distance oneself from agency or responsibility.
Okay, and for those who can't see it, it's a photo of you in a hot tub. There's a person next to you here. Do you remember where it was taken? Where was it taken?
I'm almost sure that this pic, and I think there's an adjacent photograph, which you probably have, that if people saw it, they would feel that someone was trying to con them showing this picture. But anyway, this picture was taken in Brunei. And we flew one night on a trip to Asia, the last very long leg.
Clinton's response to this high-stakes question is layered with strategic linguistic moves. The hedges,
I'm almost sure that, and I think,
signal uncertainty, reducing liability while still appearing cooperative. Next comes a subtle rhetorical maneuver. He references an adjacent photograph and says that if people saw it,
they would feel that someone was trying to con them showing this picture.
This is more than a factual statement. It's a meta-commentary on perception. He anticipates how the audience might interpret what they see, and he signals that others may have influenced or framed that interpretation. In other words, he's showing awareness not just of the specifics, but of how those specifics will be judged. This demonstrates self-awareness and deliberate narrative control. The phrase, "but anyway," signals that the adjacent photo isn't the one he was asked about, while still letting him introduce it in a way that protects himself and shapes the narrative. He then finally provides the location, Brunei, but situates it within a broader narrative of travel and a long night flight. Embedding the detail this way introduces temporal and situational context, implying fatigue and reduced attention, a natural buffer for gaps in memory or awareness. Disfluencies and self-repairs, with multiple pauses, signal careful online formulation, showing him constructing his answer with caution and narrative control. In just a few lines, Clinton hedges his certainty, shifts the listener's focus, anticipates audience perception, and manages risk through language and pacing.
You said we, who is that including?
Well, my TEL team that was working
Thank you.
on the AIDS issue, and Mr. Epstein was there, and Miss Maxwell. But anyway, we got to the end of the flight was Brunei. It's a tiny place, but a very wealthy one, and the Sultan of Brunei was a man that I had gotten to know well in my 8 years as president. And his first involvement with international matters was basically to join the Asian Pacific Economic Leaders Conference, which I started and which he attended. And then he was very proud of that, and he hosted, his time came to host it. You know, you do these things in a rotation. And it came either at the very end of my term or maybe the next year. Anyway, he wanted, when he knew I was coming, he said he wanted to help me with my AIDS initiative, and he invited me to stay there. And he said, I want you to stay at this hotel, and I hope you'll use the pool. So I did, and then I got out and went to bed, exhausted.
Clinton begins by naming people, his team, Epstein, Maxwell. This fulfills the immediate adjacency pair requirement, question, answer, but notice immediately how he uses "but anyway."
And Mr. Epstein was there, and Miss Maxwell. But anyway, we got to the end of
a rhetorical pivot that downplays the significance of the people just mentioned and redirects the listener's attention to the broader travel narrative. This small phrase functions as discursive deflection, subtly implying that the identities of those present are incidental compared to the larger story. His narrative embeds the pool visit within a broader diplomatic and humanitarian mission, framing the event as mundane and procedural rather than sensational. Frequent references to his presidency, the Sultan, and international work reinforce his statesman identity, strengthening credibility and authority in the listener's eyes, theoretically at least. By describing the Sultan's pride, the rotation of conferences, and the instructions to use the pool, Clinton appears to anticipate audience perception. He seems aware of how this might be interpreted, and frames it as innocuous, professional, and routine. Now, notice the second anyway before he mentions the pool.
You know, you do these things in a rotation. And it came either at the very end of my term or maybe the next year. Anyway, he wanted, when he knew I was coming.
It could signal a conscious shift, that he senses that all the preceding details, the Sultan, the conference, the rotation, the dates, may not be what the question is really asking, yet he includes them anyway for self-protective reasons. The second anyway functions like a reset, pivoting the listener to the minimal, factual portion about the pool. And the description of the pool event itself is strikingly brief.
So I did, and then I got out and went to bed, exhausted.
Compared to the long narrative leading up to it, the pool, the central event under questioning, is almost glossed over. Linguistically, this brevity minimizes the importance of the potentially sensitive action, making it appear insignificant within the larger context he has carefully constructed. In statement analysis, the concept of narrative balance is often used when assessing the reliability of a narrative. A typical narrative consists of 3 parts: a prologue, a critical event, and an aftermath. The prologue sets the scene for the critical event and is normally brief. The critical event is the most important part because it describes the main action. For that reason, it should usually be the longest and most detailed part of the account. Finally, the aftermath briefly explains what happened after the event. In this case, when Clinton says he went to bed exhausted. In Clinton's account, however, the narrative balance appears reversed. He spends a disproportionate amount of time on the prologue, describing the trip, the Sultan, and the broader context. The critical event, the pool, is described only very briefly. And notably, the hot tub, which becomes the focus in the next line of questioning, isn't mentioned at all in his initial account. Throughout, numerous disfluencies and self-repairs reveal just how cautious and deliberate Clinton is in constructing his answer.
Just for the record, there's another picture that also shows this as part of the larger pool area. Do you all have that so that he can refresh his recollection with respect to that?
We should have it. It's quite enlightening. If you watch this,
Yes, it's noted.
it'll
Yes.
give you a different feel.
Thank you.
With his directive
We should have it.
and perception managing comment,
Yes, it's noted.
It'll
Yes.
give you a different feel.
Thank you.
Clinton immediately demonstrates an attempt to maintain control. Rather than describing the content of the photo, he focuses on the experience of observing it, shifting attention away from himself and onto the viewer's perception. He's essentially saying, the photo matters more in how others perceive it than in what actually happened, which subtly deflects scrutiny from his own actions. This is an example of rhetorical distancing and meta-commentary, directing attention to how the image will feel to viewers, rather than what he actually did. By calling it quite enlightening and noting it will give you a different feel, he acknowledges that the photo exists without committing to its content. The discussion becomes about how it feels to watch the photo, rather than what actually happened. Enlightening is neutral and almost passive. It suggests interest or value, but it doesn't imply guilt, awareness, or wrongdoing.
Okay.
We don't have it with us right now.
Okay,
We do
thanks. I just
have
wanted
it
to
as
make
well.
sure he knew the
And so
context.
were there other people in that pool or hot tub with you as well?
I don't think there's anybody in the hot tub. I didn't forgotten that there was anybody in the hot tub, but it was big, but it was about.
Here, the questioner shifts from general context and location to a much more specific issue. Who else was present? This is a narrowing strategy in questioning. Earlier question established the setting. Now the focus moves to identifying individuals, which is often where liability or sensitive details emerge. Clinton begins with the hedge, "I don't think," softening his claim. This reduces certainty while still providing an answer, an extremely common strategy in testimony, when the speaker wants to avoid committing to something that could later be contradicted. He then immediately adds a memory disclaimer.
I didn't forgotten that there was anybody in the hot tub, but
This is noteworthy because rather than denying anyone was there, he frames the issue as a lapse in memory. In other words, the focus shifts from the event itself to his recollection of it. In high-stakes testimony, this type of memory lapse often functions strategically. It allows the speaker to avoid committing to specifics while still appearing cooperative. That may be the case here. Clinton's remarkably quick to offer irrelevant details about the hot tub.
I didn't forgotten that there was anybody in the hot tub, but it was big, but it was about.
Well, there's
He's asking in the pool
it
area.
appears
Which can have the effect of shifting attention away from who was there. Notice the self-repair and disfluency.
I didn't forgotten that.
These mid-sentence corrections show how he's actively adjusting his answer in real time to balance accuracy, caution, and impression management. Finally, notice that the questioner mentions both the pool and the hot tub, but Clinton responds only to the hot tub. He doesn't discuss who was in the pool until prompted, suggesting selective recollection or a deliberate omission. Next, we see how he's prompted to address it.
well,
He's asking in the pool
it appears
area.
this photo. There's a girl over here, or there's someone.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
But he's also asking in the pool area were there other
Yes,
individuals.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, so you don't know.
No, and then there were other people in the pool.
The investigators are effectively tightening the frame, preventing Clinton from limiting the discussion to a narrower interpretation of the scene. Clinton's focus on self-protection is underlined by the repetition of his denial twice, despite only being asked if someone was present.
I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is.
Repetition here often functions as stance reinforcement. It emphasizes the certainty of the claim while carefully avoiding elaboration. When the questioner pushes for confirmation,
Okay, so you don't know.
Clinton responds with a minimal answer.
No,
Minimalism is a common strategy in high-stakes testimony. Brief answers reduce opportunities for follow-up or contradiction. However, immediately after this brief denial, he adds a structural clarification.
and then there were other people in the pool.
This is interesting because the investigators were asking about specific individuals, but Clinton's answer returns to a general description of the scene. He acknowledges the presence of others, without specifying who they were, emphasizing uncertainty and limited recall, rather than providing details. So he remembers there were other people in the pool, just not who the woman is. A precedent bathing or being allowed to bathe with a stranger, and he doesn't have even a vague idea of who it is. How interesting. Notice the pattern. As questions become more specific, Clinton's statements shift from elaborate narratives about the trip to short, cautious, and less detailed answers, focusing on memory gaps, uncertainty, and minimalism.
Okay, so do you remember were they under 18? Would you know? No.
Clinton's one-word response, no, is an example of minimalism under pressure, short, declarative, and leaving no room for follow-up on specifics. It functions as a clear form of linguistic self-protection and also signals, almost inadvertently, that the topic is sensitive for him. The follow-up question then becomes, why is it sensitive?
Were they part of your traveling party, he's asking you?
Yes, they were, I think. I think everybody there was part of our party. It was late at night or late-ish, and I also believe that there was a Secret Service agent there at the other end of the pool.
Clinton's pauses and self-repairs reveal hesitation and a careful maneuvering to control the pace of disclosure. The hedging,
I think
softens the certainty of his claim, positioning him as cooperative while allowing for plausible memory gaps. In other words, he asserts that everyone there was part of his traveling party, yet he still doesn't identify the woman in question. Notice how he adds contextual details. Immediately after the claim, it was late at night and a Secret Service agent was at the other end of the pool. This frames the scene as controlled, safe, and orderly, subtly downplaying any concern about the presence of others, including people who shouldn't be there. He hedges again with,
I also believe that
regarding the agent, granting himself further leeway. So now he remembers there was an agent present. He just didn't know the woman. Clinton seems to remember quite well who was there and who they were.
Okay, and was this in public?
no, it was a hotel room, and the Sultan wanted us to stay there, and the water, this big pool, was on the same floor. That there were several suites, so we went out. I swam around. I sat in the hot tub for 5 minutes, or whatever it was, and I got up and went to bed.
Clinton minimizes the actual pool event, the focus of the questioning, by compressing it into a very short summary.
I swam around. I sat in the hot tub for 5 minutes, or whatever it was, and I got up and went to bed.
After a long narrative about context, location, and timing, the central action under scrutiny is summarized in a single sentence, making it appear brief, mundane, and almost incidental. This is a highly strategic move. Several testimony tactics are visible throughout this passage. Minimalism on sensitive questions, short answers reduce liability, hedging and memory disclaimers. Phrases like "I think" allow plausible deniability. Contextual framing, emphasizing time, supervision, and location, downplays potential risk. Compression of central events. The hot tub, pool action is described quickly. Strategic pauses and disfluencies give him time to choose words carefully and control the pace of disclosure or lack thereof. Across these exchanges, a clear pattern emerges. Hedging, Memory disclaimers and strategic framing dominate. Key details are minimized or compressed, and convenient lapses in memory appear repeatedly. On the surface, the testimony may seem plausible, but the selective recall and careful narrative control leave its reliability open to question. Subscribe for more videos. See you next time.